The fluorescent lights of Seattle Children's Hospital cast harsh shadows across Atlas Sinclair's face as he stood in the doorway of room 314. His $3,000 suit incongruous among the colorful cartoon murals and teddy bear decorations. "So this is where you disappear to," his voice cut through the quiet beeping of medical monitors, making Evangeline Wells freeze beside the small hospital bed. "While I'm making excuses to my board about why my wife vanished during the most important dinner of the quarter." Evangeline slowly turned, her face pale with exhaustion and terror. In the bed behind her lay a 6-year-old girl with dark curls and an oxygen cannula, sleeping peacefully despite the chaos about to unfold. "Atlas, I can explain, can you?" His voice was deadly quiet, but Evangeline could see the storm building behind his steel-gray eyes. "Because right now, I'm trying to understand how my wife, my contracted, temporary, strictly business wife, has a secret daughter that she somehow forgot to mention when she signed a 2-year agreement to share my life." "Please," Evangeline whispered, moving protectively closer to the bed. "She's sleeping. Whatever you're going to say, whatever you're going to do, please don't wake her." Atlas stepped fully into the room, and for the first time since Evangeline had known him, his perfectly controlled mask slipped. His eyes landed on the little girl, the same violet eyes as her mother, delicate features that spoke of vulnerability and strength, and something fundamental shifted in his expression. "How long?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion he couldn't quite suppress. "How long what? How long has she been sick? How long have you been carrying this alone? How long have you been lying to me about who you really are?" Evangeline's carefully constructed world was crumbling around her, but she lifted her chin with defiant grace. 6 years for the first question, 3 months for the second, and every single day since I signed your contract for the third. Atlas stared at her for a long moment, then at the sleeping child, then back at the woman he'd married for convenience and found himself caring about despite every rational instinct. "What's her name?" "Melody. And you've been paying for her medical care by yourself? Working night shifts I never knew about? Sacrificing everything while pretending to be my perfectly put-together wife?" Evangeline's eyes filled with tears she'd been holding back for months. "I never asked you to care about this, Atlas. Our contract doesn't include—" "Fuck the contract," Atlas said quietly, the profanity shocking from a man who never lost his composure. "What does she need?" "But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this impossible love story really began, because what you just witnessed, that's the moment when a business arrangement became something neither of them could have predicted. Stay with me tonight. Not because of the contract. Not because anyone's watching. Just stay." These words, whispered in a sterile hospital corridor, would shatter a $4.2 billion empire and expose secrets that 3 families had kept buried for decades. Have you ever wondered what it would be like to marry someone for money? To sign a contract that promises everything except the one thing that actually matters, love? Have you ever been so desperate that you'd agree to live a lie just to survive another day? Tonight's story is about 2 people who thought they could keep their hearts out of a business deal. This isn't just another fake marriage romance. This is about how a ruthless billionaire CEO and a struggling single mother entered a marriage that was supposed to be strictly business, only to uncover a web of family secrets, hidden children, and a love so dangerous it could destroy everything they've built. It's about the moment when pretending becomes real, when contracts become commitments, and when the most unexpected families are formed. But what if I told you that their marriage contract wasn't random? What if everything, the meeting, the offer, even the timing, was orchestrated by someone who'd been pulling the strings for years? What if the man who seemed to have everything was actually the most broken of all? Before we dive into this incredible story of fake marriage turned real love, do me a favor, hit that like button if you've ever had to choose between your heart and your security. Subscribe to Lux Love Chronicles with Mr. Wentworth, because the stories I share here will prove that sometimes the greatest love comes from the most impossible circumstances. Now, let me take you to Seattle, 3 months before that hospital confrontation, to show you how 2 people who never wanted to fall in love ended up risking everything for a family they never expected. Atlas Sinclair stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office on the 58th floor of the Sinclair Tower, watching the morning fog roll across Elliott Bay like a gray shroud. At 34, he commanded a luxury hospitality empire worth $4.2 billion, but the man reflected in the glass looked haunted by ghosts that money couldn't exorcise. "Mr. Sinclair?" His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. Your attorney is here with the estate documents. Send him in, Paige. Harrison Blackwell entered carrying a leather portfolio that contained Atlas's immediate future or his complete destruction. The elder attorney had been handling Sinclair family business for 3 decades, but today his usually confident demeanor seemed strained. Well, Atlas asked without turning from the window. How bad is it? Your grandfather was creative in his final wishes, Harrison replied carefully. The will is ironclad, Atlas. I've had 3 different firms review it. Atlas finally turned, his steel-gray eyes reflecting none of the vulnerability he felt. Read it to me. The exact wording. Harrison opened the portfolio and cleared his throat. To my grandson Atlas Sinclair, who has built an empire but forgotten how to build a life. You will inherit full control of Sinclair Enterprises and all associated assets only upon the condition that you are legally married within 6 months of my death. Should you fail to meet this requirement, control of the company will pass to my other heir, Darius Sinclair, along with all voting shares and decision-making authority. 6 months, Atlas repeated flatly. He's been dead for 5, which gives you exactly 37 days to find a wife, Harrison confirmed. Atlas, your grandfather also included a personal letter. I don't want to hear his justifications, Atlas cut him off. What I want to know is if there are any loopholes. None. The marriage must be legal, documented, and... Harrison hesitated. And what? Consummated. Atlas laughed bitterly. Of course it must be. The old man thought of everything. He moved to his desk, pulling out a crystal decanter of scotch despite the early hour. What about Darius? What's his current status? Married for 2 years, 2 children, and very eager to assume control of your company. My company, Atlas corrected sharply. The company I built from the ground up while he was gambling away his trust fund in Monaco. Nevertheless, if you're not married in 37 days, I get it. Atlas poured 2 fingers of scotch and downed it in 1 swallow. Then I need to find a wife. Harrison studied his client with concern. Atlas, perhaps this is an opportunity to what? Fall in love. Find my soulmate. Atlas's voice dripped with sarcasm. This is a business transaction, Harrison. Nothing more. But even as he said the words, Atlas's hand unconsciously moved to the scar on his palm, a permanent reminder of the night 8 years ago when his reckless driving had killed his younger sister, Iris. The night that had taught him that caring about people only led to devastating loss. I need someone who won't expect romance or emotion, Atlas continued, his voice becoming calculated. Someone with their own reasons for entering a temporary arrangement. Someone who needs something I can provide. You're talking about a contract marriage. I'm talking about a mutually beneficial business agreement, Atlas corrected. 2 years should be sufficient to satisfy the will's requirements and establish my permanent control. After that, a quiet divorce and both parties walk away with what they wanted. Harrison looked troubled. And if you develop feelings for this woman? Atlas's smile was cold as winter. I won't. I can't afford to. Across the city, Evangeline Wells sat in the cramped office of Wells and Associates Architecture, staring at a past due notice that might as well have been a death sentence. The elegant woman with auburn hair and violet eyes had once been hailed as one of Seattle's most promising young architects, but that was before her business partner had embezzled their funds and disappeared, leaving her drowning in debt and professional disgrace. Mama, are you sad again? Evangeline looked up to find her 6-year-old daughter, Melody, standing in the doorway with a concerned expression that was far too mature for her age. The little girl clutched a worn stuffed elephant, her dark curls framing a face that was beautiful despite the pallor that spoke of too many medical procedures. No, sweetheart, Evangeline lied, quickly sliding the bill under a stack of architectural drawings. Just working. How was your nap? Good. Mrs. Chen made me soup. Melody climbed into the chair across from her mother's desk, swinging her small legs that didn't quite reach the floor. Mama, why do you have scary papers? Evangeline's heart clenched. Her daughter was too perceptive, too aware of the stress that dominated their lives. They're just business papers, baby. Nothing for you to worry about. But Melody's medical bills were everything to worry about. The rare heart condition that required constant monitoring, regular procedures, and medications that cost more than most people's monthly salaries. Evangeline worked 3 jobs, her struggling architecture firm during the day, freelance drafting at night, and weekend shifts at a coffee shop, and it still wasn't enough. Evangeline, her assistant, Jamie, appeared in the doorway holding an envelope. This was just delivered by courier, marked urgent. The envelope was heavy, expensive paper with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of letterhead that made Evangeline's breath catch. Sinclair Enterprises. Ms. Wells, I have a business proposition that may be of mutual benefit. I understand you are currently facing financial difficulties that could be resolved with the right partnership. I am in need of a wife for a period of 2 years. In exchange for your participation in this arrangement, I am prepared to offer $2 million upon signing, full payment of any outstanding debts, and the opportunity to serve as lead architect on my new flagship resort project in the San Juan Islands. This would be a strictly business arrangement with predetermined terms and a clear end date. If you are interested, please meet me tomorrow at 7 p.m. at the Metropolitan Grill, downtown. Ask for the Sinclair reservation. Time is of the essence. Atlas Sinclair Evangeline read the letter 3 times before the words fully sank in. $2 million. Enough to pay for Melody's treatment, to save her firm, to give her daughter the life she deserved. Mama. Melody's voice seemed to come from very far away. You look funny. I'm fine, baby. But Evangeline's hands were shaking as she folded the letter. A marriage of convenience to a billionaire she'd never met. It was insane, impossible, and potentially the answer to every prayer she'd whispered in hospital waiting rooms. Jamie, she called out, her voice steadier than she felt. Cancel my appointments for tomorrow evening. You're actually considering this? Jamie asked, having obviously glimpsed the letter's contents. Evangeline looked at her daughter, who was now playing with building blocks on the floor, humming softly to herself. Melody didn't know that her mother lay awake every night terrified that the next medical bill would be the one they couldn't pay. She didn't know that Evangeline had already mortgaged everything they owned and was facing bankruptcy. I'm considering my daughter's future, Evangeline replied quietly. The Metropolitan Grill was exactly the kind of establishment where billionaires conducted life-changing business over perfectly prepared steaks. Evangeline arrived precisely on time, wearing her best dress, a simple black sheath that she bought for client presentations back when she could afford such luxuries. Atlas Sinclair was already seated at a private corner table, and Evangeline's first thought was that photographs didn't do him justice. He was tall, probably 6'3", with dark hair that was perfectly styled despite showing traces of premature silver at the temples. His suit was clearly custom-made. His posture spoke of absolute confidence, and his steel gray eyes missed nothing as she approached. Ms. Wells. He stood as she reached the table, extending his hand. Thank you for coming. His handshake was firm, professional, and brief. No lingering, no inappropriate assessment, no charm. This was clearly a business meeting, nothing more. Mr. Sinclair. Evangeline took the seat he held for her, trying to project a confidence she didn't feel. Your letter was unusual. Direct. Atlas corrected, retaking his seat. I find it saves time. He gestured to the wine menu. Would you like something to drink? Just water, please. I prefer to keep a clear head for business discussions. Something that might have been approval flickered in his eyes. Practical. I appreciate that. He signaled the waiter, then turned his full attention to her. I assume you have questions. Several. Evangeline folded her hands in her lap to stop them from trembling. Starting with why you chose me. We've never met, and I hardly move in billionaire circles. I did my research, Atlas replied matter-of-factly. You're intelligent, professional, and currently facing financial difficulties that would make this arrangement attractive. You're also single with no romantic entanglements that would complicate matters. Evangeline felt her cheeks flush. You investigated me? Due diligence. I need to know who I'm entering into business with. Atlas leaned back slightly. Your architectural firm is drowning in debt thanks to your partner's embezzlement. You're 3 months behind on rent, facing bankruptcy, and struggling to maintain your professional reputation. Am I wrong? The clinical assessment of her failures made Evangeline's stomach turn, but she forced herself to maintain eye contact. No, you're not wrong. But that doesn't explain why you need a wife badly enough to pay $2 million for one. For the first time, Atlas's controlled expression flickered. Family obligations. Let's just say my grandfather had very specific ideas about how his empire should be inherited. And when this arrangement ends, clean divorce, no complications, no ongoing obligations. You'll have the money to rebuild your firm and establish your independence. I'll have satisfied the requirements of the will. Atlas pulled out a leather portfolio. I've had my attorneys draft a preliminary contract. Obviously, you'll want your own legal representation to review it. Evangeline stared at the folder containing what might be her salvation. What exactly would be expected of me? You would move into my penthouse, attend necessary social functions as my wife, and maintain the appearance of a successful marriage for public and family purposes. We would have separate bedrooms, separate lives, and a clear understanding that this is business only. And after 2 years, quiet divorce, sealed records, and you walk away with enough money to never worry about financial security again. The waiter appeared with their drinks, and Evangeline used the interruption to study the man across from her. Atlas Sinclair was everything she'd expected a billionaire to be: confident, controlled, successful. But there was something else beneath the polished surface, a carefully guarded pain that spoke of losses he'd never recovered from. "Mr. Sinclair," she said finally, "can I ask you something personal?" "You can ask. Why not just find someone you actually care about? Someone you could build a real relationship with?" Atlas's smile was sharp as a blade. "Because caring about people is a luxury I can't afford, Ms. Wells. This way, we both get what we need without the messy complications of emotion." Evangeline looked down at the contract, thinking of Melody's medical bills, her failing firm, and the uncertain future that awaited them both if she walked away from this table. "I need time to think," she said. "You have 24 hours, Atlas replied. "After that, I'll need to explore other options." As Evangeline left the restaurant, the contract portfolio clutched in her trembling hands. She had no idea that her decision would not only save her daughter's life, it would also awaken something in Atlas Sinclair that he thought had died with his sister 8 years ago. The business arrangement was about to become something neither of them could control. And there's the setup that changes everything. A desperate billionaire with a grandfather's impossible will, a struggling mother with a secret daughter, and a marriage contract that seems like the perfect solution to both their problems. But as we're about to discover, the best-laid plans of emotionally guarded people tend to go astray when real feelings get involved. 23 hours and 47 minutes after leaving the Metropolitan Grill, Evangeline sat at her kitchen table, staring at the contract that could change everything. Melody was finally asleep after another restless night, and the apartment was quiet except for the steady hum of the air purifier that helped with her daughter's breathing. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. 13 minutes remaining, AS. Even his texts were coldly efficient. Evangeline's hands trembled as she picked up the pen. $2 million. Melody's medical bills paid in full. A chance to rebuild her career. All she had to do was pretend to love a man who had made it clear he was incapable of loving anyone back. She signed her name with a flourish that belied her terror. Her phone rang immediately. "Ms. Wells." Atlas's voice was as controlled as ever. "I assume you've reached a decision?" "I have." Evangeline took a shaky breath. "I accept your terms." "Excellent. The marriage ceremony is scheduled for Friday morning at the courthouse. A car will pick you up at 9. "Wait," Evangeline said, panic suddenly flooding through her. "This Friday? That's 3 days away. Time is a factor, as I mentioned. You'll also need to resign from your current position and arrange for your personal effects to be moved to my penthouse by the weekend. I can't just abandon my life in 3 days, Ms. Wells," Atlas interrupted, his voice brooking no argument. "We have a contract now. I trust you understand what that means." The line went dead, leaving Evangeline staring at her phone and wondering what she'd just committed herself to. The courthouse wedding was as sterile and businesslike as everything else about Atlas Sinclair. Evangeline wore a simple cream-colored dress she'd bought from a department store, while Atlas looked devastatingly handsome in a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent. The ceremony lasted exactly 12 minutes. "Do you, Atlas Sinclair, take Evangeline Wells to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." His voice was steady, emotionless. "Do you, Evangeline Wells, take Atlas Sinclair to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Evangeline's throat felt dry as sand. "I do. You may kiss the bride." Atlas stepped closer, his steel gray eyes searching her face for a moment before he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was brief, proper, and absolutely nothing like the earth-shattering moment Evangeline had always imagined her first married kiss would be. Except for the unexpected jolt of electricity that shot through her when his lips touched hers, and the way his eyes darkened slightly when they separated. and the fact that her heart was now beating so fast she was certain he could hear it. "Congratulations," the judge said with practiced enthusiasm. "You're now husband and wife." As they signed the marriage certificate, Atlas's attorney handed Evangeline a bank card. "The first payment," Harrison explained quietly. "The remaining funds will be transferred over the course of the arrangement." Evangeline stared at the card that represented her daughter's salvation, feeling strangely hollow. She was now Mrs. Atlas Sinclair, wife to a billionaire, and she had never felt more alone in her life. "Ready?" Atlas asked, offering his arm with the same impersonal courtesy he might show a business associate. "Ready," Evangeline lied. Atlas's penthouse occupied the entire top floor of the Sinclair Tower, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering breathtaking views of Elliott Bay and the Olympic Mountains. The decor was modern and masculine, all clean lines, expensive materials, and absolutely no personal touches that might reveal anything about the man who lived there. "Your room," Atlas said, opening a door to reveal a spacious bedroom with its own sitting area and marble bathroom. "I'm at the other end of the hall. The office between us can be converted to your workspace if you prefer to work from home." Evangeline set down her single suitcase, acutely aware of how little she was bringing to this new life. "And Melody?" Atlas paused in the doorway. "Melody? My daughter." Evangeline's heart stopped. "I told you I had a daughter." "No," Atlas said slowly, his voice dangerous. "You most definitely did not." The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Evangeline realized with growing horror that in all their negotiations, in all the contract discussions, she had somehow failed to mention the most important person in her life. "She's 6, Evangeline said quickly. "She has a medical condition that requires, get out. Atlas, please, get out of my penthouse, out of my life, and out of my marriage." Atlas's voice was deadly quiet. "The contract is void." "Wait." Evangeline stepped toward him, desperate. "You don't understand. She needs, I don't care what she needs," Atlas snapped. "I contracted for a wife, not a family." This deception, it wasn't deception. Evangeline shot back, her own anger flaring. "It was survival. My daughter is dying, and I will do whatever it takes to save her, including marrying a man who clearly has ice water instead of blood." Atlas stared at her, his face a mask of cold fury. "You lied to me." "I omitted information," Evangeline corrected. "Just like you omitted the fact that you're clearly a heartless bastard who wouldn't recognize love if it bit him on his perfectly tailored ass." Something flickered in Atlas's eyes, surprise, perhaps, that she'd fought back. "You have 1 hour to pack and leave." "Fine," Evangeline said, lifting her chin with fierce pride. "But when you lose your company to your cousin, when you end up with nothing because you were too proud and too scared to bend even an inch, remember that you chose this. You chose to destroy the one chance you had at winning because you couldn't tolerate the idea of caring about a sick little girl." She turned toward her suitcase, tears burning her eyes. "I hope your ice-cold heart keeps you warm at night, Mr. Sinclair." "Wait." Evangeline froze, her hand on the zipper. "This medical condition," Atlas said, his voice carefully controlled. "How serious is it?" Evangeline turned slowly, hope and fear warring in her chest. "She has a rare heart defect. She needs surgery, but the waiting list for pediatric cardiac specialists is 18 months, and I can't afford to go private." Atlas was quiet for a long moment, studying her face with an intensity that made her nervous. "Where is she now?" "With my neighbor, Mrs. Chun. She watches Melody when I have to work." "Bring her here." "What?" "Bring your daughter here," Atlas repeated. "Tonight. We'll figure out new terms." Evangeline stared at him in shock. "You're not throwing me out?" "I'm modifying our agreement," Atlas corrected. "But understand this, Evangeline, if you lie to me again, if you keep any more secrets, this arrangement ends immediately. Are we clear?" "Crystal," Evangeline whispered, hardly daring to believe this reprieve. "Good. Now go get your daughter. We have a marriage to fake." When Evangeline returned 3 hours later with Melody in tow, Atlas was waiting in the living room, his expression unreadable. The little girl clutched her stuffed elephant and stayed close to her mother's side, violet eyes wide as she took in the opulent surroundings. "Melody," Evangeline said gently, "this is Atlas. He's going to be your new stepfather." Atlas knelt down to Melody's eye level, his movements careful and precise. "Hello, Melody. Your mother tells me you like elephants." Melody nodded shyly, holding up her stuffed animal. "This is Peanut. He helps me when I'm scared." "He looks very brave," Atlas said seriously. Would you like to see your new room? The room Atlas showed them had been hastily but thoughtfully prepared. A princess bed with pink sheets, a bookshelf filled with children's books, and toys that looked like they'd been purchased by someone who had consulted with experts rather than relying on personal experience. "It's beautiful," Melody whispered, her eyes shining. "Mama, is this really mine?" "Yes, sweetheart," Evangeline said, her throat tight with emotion. "It's really yours." That night, as Evangeline tucked Melody into her new bed, her daughter looked up with serious eyes. "Mama, are you going to marry Atlas for real?" "We're already married, baby," Evangeline said carefully. "We had the ceremony today. But do you love him? Like in the fairy tales?" Evangeline glanced toward the doorway, where Atlas stood listening to their conversation. Their eyes met for a moment before he turned away. "Love is complicated, sweetheart," Evangeline said finally. "Sometimes grown-ups marry for different reasons. But you'll try to love him?" Melody asked hopefully. "Because he seems sad. Like he needs someone to take care of him too." Out of the mouths of babes, Evangeline thought. "I'll try, baby. I'll try." The next few weeks fell into a strange routine. Atlas left early for work and returned late, maintaining the same schedule he'd kept as a bachelor. Evangeline worked from the converted office, taking on freelance projects while slowly rebuilding her professional reputation. Melody adapted to her new life with the resilience of childhood, delighting in her princess room and the treats Atlas would sometimes leave for her: books, art supplies, small toys that showed he was paying attention to her interests even when he seemed completely detached. Their first public appearance as a married couple was at a board meeting where Atlas needed to present his new family stability to investors. Evangeline wore a designer dress Atlas had purchased for her, styled her hair in an elegant updo, and practiced her smile in the mirror until it looked natural. "Remember," Atlas said as they rode the elevator to the boardroom, "we're happily married. Madly in love. This marriage saved both our lives." "Right," Evangeline replied, smoothing her skirt nervously. "Madly in love. Got it." When the elevator doors opened, Atlas immediately transformed. His hand found the small of her back, his smile became warm and genuine, and when he introduced her to the board members, his voice carried just the right note of pride and affection. "Gentlemen, I'd like you to meet my wife, Evangeline," he said, his arm sliding around her waist. "She's the brilliant architect who'll be designing our new flagship resort." The way he said "my wife" sent an unexpected shiver down Evangeline's spine. For a moment, it almost sounded real. The meeting went smoothly until board member Charles Morrison made an offhand comment. "Well, Atlas, we were all beginning to think you'd never settle down. What finally changed your mind?" Atlas's hand tightened slightly on Evangeline's waist. "Sometimes you meet someone who makes you realize what you've been missing," he said, looking down at her with such convincing tenderness that Evangeline's breath caught. "Evangeline reminded me that success means nothing if you don't have someone to share it with." The words were perfectly scripted, exactly what the board wanted to hear. So why did they make Evangeline's heart race as if they were true? Can you feel the tension building between them? They're supposed to be faking this marriage, but those looks, those little moments of genuine connection, this is how real love starts to grow. Drop a comment below if you've ever found yourself falling for someone you weren't supposed to, because Atlas and Evangeline are about to discover that the heart doesn't follow contracts. The first real crack in their carefully maintained distance came 3 weeks into their marriage. Evangeline was working late in her home office when she heard Melody crying. She rushed to her daughter's room to find Atlas already there, sitting on the edge of the bed, his usually perfect appearance disheveled. "What happened?" Evangeline asked, immediately checking Melody for signs of distress. "Bad dream," Atlas said quietly, his hand gently smoothing Melody's dark curls. "She was calling for you, but you were on that conference call with the resort developers." Evangeline felt a stab of guilt. "I should have. You were working," Atlas interrupted. "I told her a story about a brave princess who saved her kingdom with her architectural plans." Melody looked up at Evangeline with sleepy eyes. "Atlas makes good stories, Mama, and he knows the right voice for dragons." As they tucked Melody back in, Evangeline caught a glimpse of something unexpected in Atlas's expression: tenderness, genuine care, and a pain so deep it made her chest ache. "Thank you," she said as they left Melody's room. "You didn't have to. She's a good kid," Atlas said gruffly. "And she shouldn't have to suffer because of adult problems." There was something in his tone, a weight of old grief, that made Evangeline want to ask questions. But before she could, Atlas had already retreated to his office, the moment of vulnerability carefully locked away. The first major test of their public charade came 6 weeks into their marriage. The annual Sinclair Foundation Charity Gala, a high society event where Seattle's elite gathered to see and be seen while writing tax-deductible checks for worthy causes. Evangeline spent hours getting ready, aided by a team of stylists Atlas had hired. The result was breathtaking. She wore a midnight blue gown that hugged her curves perfectly, her auburn hair swept into an elegant chignon, diamonds at her throat, and ears that probably cost more than her old apartment. When she emerged from her room, Atlas was waiting in the living room, devastating in a black tuxedo. His reaction when he saw her was subtle but unmistakable, a slight widening of his eyes, a pause in his breathing, a look that made heat pool in her stomach. "You look," he began, then stopped, seeming to remember their arrangement. "Appropriate. The photographers will be pleased." The gala was held at the Four Seasons, and from the moment they arrived, they were on display. Atlas played his part perfectly, the devoted husband who couldn't keep his hands off his beautiful wife. His palms stayed at the small of her back. He leaned in close when speaking to her, and when they danced, he held her like she was precious. "You're very good at this," Evangeline murmured as they swayed to the orchestra's rendition of "The Way You Look Tonight." "Good at what?" "Playing the part of a man in love." Something shifted in Atlas's expression. "Is that what I'm doing?" Before Evangeline could answer, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his face went pale. "I need to take this," he said, already stepping away from her. "It's about Melody." The call was from Mrs. Chen. Melody had spiked a fever and was having trouble breathing. They needed to get to the hospital immediately. "We have to go," Evangeline said, panic rising in her voice. "Right now." "The gala," Atlas began. "I don't care about the gala," Evangeline snapped. "My daughter is sick." Atlas stared at her for a moment, seeing the terror in her eyes, the way her hands shook as she reached for her purse. Then he was moving, his arm around her waist, guiding her toward the exit. "The car is already waiting," he said quietly. "We'll be there in 10 minutes. As they rushed through the hospital corridors, Evangeline's carefully constructed composure finally cracked. The stress of maintaining their facade, the constant worry about Melody's health, the confusion of her growing feelings for Atlas, it all hit her at once. She found herself hyperventilating in a hospital bathroom, tears streaming down her face, unable to catch her breath. The bathroom door opened, and Atlas appeared, his face creased with concern. "Hey," he said gently, kneeling beside her on the cold tile floor. "Look at me, Evangeline. Just look at me." His hands framed her face, his thumbs wiping away her tears. "Breathe with me, okay? In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. Just like this." He demonstrated the breathing pattern, his voice calm and steady, and slowly, Evangeline's panic began to subside. When she could finally speak, her voice was raw with emotion. "I can't lose her, Atlas. She's all I have. If something happens to her, nothing is going to happen to her," Atlas said fiercely. "I promise you, Evangeline. Whatever she needs, whatever it costs, we'll make sure she gets the best care possible." In that moment, sitting on a hospital bathroom floor with her makeup ruined and her carefully styled hair falling around her face, Evangeline realized with crystal clarity that she was falling in love with her fake husband. And from the way Atlas was looking at her, like she was something precious and fragile and worth protecting, she suspected he might be falling too. The walls are crumbling, aren't they? What started as a business arrangement is becoming something real, something dangerous, something that could destroy them both if they're not careful. But here's what you need to know. Everything is about to get infinitely more complicated when Atlas discovers the truth about Melody. And when family secrets start surfacing that will change everything they thought they knew about their convenient marriage. 3 months into their marriage, Evangeline had perfected the art of living a double life. By day, she was the elegant Mrs. Atlas Sinclair, attending board meetings and charity lunches, designing what would become the most exclusive resort in the Pacific Northwest. By night, she was a worried mother, sneaking out to take Melody to medical appointments, working extra freelance projects to supplement the money Atlas provided, and lying awake terrified that their carefully constructed world would collapse. The crisis came on a Tuesday evening during the most important board dinner of the quarter. The meeting where Atlas would present the resort project that would cement his control of the company for the next decade. Evangeline was seated beside Atlas at the head table of the private dining room at Canlis, wearing a burgundy silk dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. She smiled and made appropriate conversation with the wives of board members, all while her phone buzzed incessantly with calls from Mrs. Chen that she couldn't answer. "Darling," Atlas murmured, leaning close to her ear as he had been doing all evening, "you seem distracted." The endearment was for show, but something in his voice suggested genuine concern. "I'm fine," Evangeline whispered back, her stomach churning as another call came through. But she wasn't fine. Mrs. Chen's texts were becoming increasingly urgent. "Melody's fever is spiking. She's having trouble breathing. I think we need to call 911. "Excuse me," Evangeline said, standing abruptly. "I need to use the restroom." She was already walking away when her phone rang again. This time she answered. "Mrs. Chen." "Evangeline, thank God. The paramedics are here. Melody's blood oxygen is dropping, and she's asking for you. We're going to Seattle Children's Hospital." The world tilted sideways. I'm coming right now." Evangeline grabbed her purse and headed for the exit, not caring about the surprised looks from the other dinner guests. In the lobby, she called for a taxi, her hands shaking so badly she could barely dial. "Going somewhere?" Atlas's voice behind her made her freeze. She turned to find him standing in the lobby, his expression unreadable. "I have to go," she said, her voice breaking. "There's an emergency. The Tokyo investors are presenting in 20 minutes, Atlas said, his voice dangerously quiet. "This dinner determines whether we secure the $15 billion in funding for the resort project. I don't care about your resort." Evangeline snapped, tears streaming down her face. "My daughter is in an ambulance." The words hung in the air between them like a confession. Atlas's face went very still. "Your daughter," he repeated slowly. "Yes, my daughter. The one you've never asked about, never wanted to meet, never acknowledged exists." Evangeline was falling apart, months of carefully controlled emotion finally exploding. "Melody is sick. She's only 6 years old, and she needs me more than your investors need their precious presentation." Atlas stared at her for a long moment, then pulled out his phone. "James, cancel the presentation. Family emergency." He hung up and looked at Evangeline. "Which hospital? You can't leave your own board dinner." "Which hospital, Evangeline?" "Seattle Children's," she whispered. "Come on." Atlas's hand found her elbow, guiding her toward the exit. "My driver is faster than a taxi." The fluorescent lights of Seattle Children's Hospital cast harsh shadows across Atlas Sinclair's face as he stood in the doorway of room 314. His $3,000 suit incongruous among the colorful cartoon murals and teddy bear decorations. "So this is where you disappeared to," his voice cut through the quiet beeping of medical monitors, making Evangeline freeze beside the small hospital bed. "While I'm making excuses to my board about why my wife vanished during the most important dinner of the quarter." Evangeline slowly turned, her face pale with exhaustion and terror. In the bed behind her lay a 6-year-old girl with dark curls and an oxygen cannula, sleeping peacefully despite the chaos about to unfold. "Atlas, I can explain. Can you?" His voice was deadly quiet, but Evangeline could see the storm building behind his steel-gray eyes. "Because right now, I'm trying to understand how my wife, my contracted, temporary, strictly business wife, has a secret daughter that she somehow forgot to mention when she signed a 2-year agreement to share my life." "Please," Evangeline whispered, moving protectively closer to the bed. "She's sleeping. Whatever you're going to say, whatever you're going to do, please don't wake her." Atlas stepped fully into the room, and for the first time since Evangeline had known him, his perfectly controlled mask slipped. His eyes landed on the little girl, the same violet eyes as her mother, delicate features that spoke of vulnerability and strength, and something fundamental shifted in his expression. "How long?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion he couldn't quite suppress. "How long what? How long has she been sick? How long have you been carrying this alone? How long have you been lying to me about who you really are?" Evangeline's carefully constructed world was crumbling around her, but she lifted her chin with defiant grace. 6 years for the first question, 3 months for the second, and every single day since I signed your contract for the third. Atlas stared at her for a long moment, then at the sleeping child, then back at the woman he'd married for convenience, and found himself caring about despite every rational instinct. What's her name? Melody. And you've been paying for her medical care by yourself? Working night shifts I never knew about? Sacrificing everything while pretending to be my perfectly put-together wife. Evangeline's eyes filled with tears she'd been holding back for months. I never asked you to care about this, Atlas. Our contract doesn't include. Fuck the contract, Atlas said quietly, the profanity shocking from a man who never lost his composure. What does she need? What? Atlas moved closer to the bed, looking down at Melody with an expression Evangeline had never seen before, tender, protective, and heartbreakingly sad. Your daughter. What does she need to get better? Surgery, Evangeline whispered. A specialist in pediatric cardiac surgery. But the waiting list is 18 months, and the private doctors cost money I have, Atlas interrupted. What I need is a name. Who's the best pediatric cardiac surgeon in the country? Evangeline stared at him in shock. Dr. Patricia Hayes at Johns Hopkins. But Atlas, you can't just... Atlas was already on his phone. Harrison, I need you to call Johns Hopkins immediately. Dr. Patricia Hayes. Tell her Atlas Sinclair needs her in Seattle tonight, and money is no object. As he made arrangements with the efficiency that had built his empire, Evangeline sank into the chair beside Melody's bed, overwhelmed by the sudden shift in her reality. Why? She asked when he finally hung up. Why are you helping her? Atlas was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on Melody's sleeping face. Because I know what it's like to lose someone you can't live without, he said finally. And because no child should suffer for the mistakes adults make. This is the moment everything changes, isn't it? Atlas isn't the cold, heartless businessman anymore. He's a man who's been broken by loss and is determined not to let it happen again. If you're feeling the emotions as deeply as I am right now, hit that like button and tell me in the comments. When did you realize that Atlas's ice-cold exterior was just protection for a heart that had been shattered? Because we're about to discover the real reason he's so afraid to love. Dr. Patricia Hayes arrived in Seattle 6 hours later, accompanied by a team of specialists who set up a mobile cardiac unit in Melody's room with the kind of efficiency that only unlimited funding could provide. As the medical team worked, Atlas and Evangeline found themselves in the family waiting area, exhausted and emotionally drained. You didn't have to do this, Evangeline said quietly, clutching a cup of terrible coffee that had long since gone cold. Yes, I did, Atlas replied, his voice rough with fatigue. That little girl in there. She looks at you like you hung the moon. Like you're the only thing keeping her world together. I am the only thing keeping her world together, Evangeline said simply. Her father disappeared when I told him I was pregnant. Said he wasn't ready for the responsibility. Atlas's jaw tightened. What kind of man abandons his child? The kind who values his freedom more than his family, Evangeline replied, then looked at Atlas with sudden understanding. You lost someone, didn't you? Someone young. Atlas's hand unconsciously moved to the scar on his palm. My sister, Iris. She was 16, and I was supposed to be watching her. Instead, I was showing off, driving too fast, trying to impress some girl whose name I can't even remember. The words hung in the air between them, raw and painful. The accident wasn't your fault, Evangeline said gently. Wasn't it? Atlas's laugh was bitter. I was the one behind the wheel. I was the one who thought the rules didn't apply to me. I was the one who lived while she died. Evangeline set down her coffee and turned to face him fully. Atlas, look at me. What happened to your sister was an accident. What you're doing for Melody, that's choice. That's love. I don't know how to love anyone, Atlas said quietly. I thought I'd forgotten how. You're learning, Evangeline replied, her hand covering his. And you're teaching me that maybe business arrangements can become something more. Their conversation was interrupted by Dr. Hayes emerging from Melody's room, her expression cautiously optimistic. The good news is that Melody's condition is very treatable, she announced. We can perform the surgery next week, and with proper follow-up care, she should be able to live a completely normal life. Evangeline felt her knees buckle with relief. Atlas's arm immediately went around her, steadying her against his side. And the recovery? Atlas asked. 6 weeks of careful monitoring, then gradually increasing activity levels. She'll need to be in a stable, stress-free environment during the healing process. She'll have that, Atlas said firmly. Whatever she needs. Over the following days, Atlas transformed their penthouse into a child-friendly space with the same efficiency he brought to his business dealings. A physical therapist was hired, a tutor arranged, and Melody's room was equipped with everything a recovering 6-year-old could want. But it was the small gestures that revealed the man beneath the CEO facade. Atlas learned to read bedtime stories with different voices for each character. He researched child-appropriate movies and discovered that he enjoyed animated films more than he cared to admit. He even learned to make Melody's favorite grilled cheese sandwiches, though his technique was more precision engineering than cooking. "You're different with her," Evangeline observed one evening as she watched Atlas help Melody with a puzzle. "She's easy to be different with," Atlas replied, not looking up from the 1,000-piece castle they were assembling. "She doesn't expect anything from me except to show up." "Is that what you think I expect?" "Something more." Atlas finally looked at her, his steel-gray eyes reflecting a vulnerability she'd never seen before. "I think you expect me to be someone I'm not sure I can be." "Who do you think I want you to be?" "Someone capable of love," Atlas said quietly. "Someone who won't destroy everything good in his life." Evangeline knelt beside his chair, her hand resting on his knee. "Atlas, what if I told you that the man who stayed up all night researching heart surgery, who flew in the best doctors in the country, who learned to make grilled cheese sandwiches because a 6-year-old asked him to, what if I told you that man is already capable of more love than he knows?" The moment that changed everything came 2 weeks after Melody's successful surgery. The little girl was recovering beautifully, her color had returned, and her energy levels were steadily improving. She had been asking Atlas to read her favorite bedtime story, a tale about a brave princess who saved her kingdom with kindness instead of magic. As Atlas finished the story, Melody looked up at him with serious violet eyes. "Atlas, are you going to be my daddy forever?" The question hit Atlas like a physical blow. He glanced toward the doorway where Evangeline stood listening, her own eyes bright with unshed tears. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Atlas asked carefully. "Mama said you and her got married, but it was for business. But you take care of me like a real daddy would. And you make Mama smile in ways that look real, not pretend." Out of the mouths of babes. "Do you want me to be your daddy?" Atlas asked, his voice thick with emotion. "Yes," Melody said simply. "And I want you to love Mama for real, not just for business. Because I think you already do, you just haven't told her yet." That night, after Melody was asleep, Atlas found Evangeline on the penthouse terrace, looking out at the city lights. The Seattle skyline sparkled below them, but all he could see was the woman who had turned his carefully ordered world upside down. "She's right, you know," he said, joining her at the railing. "About what?" "About me loving you." Atlas turned to face her, his heart hammering against his ribs. "I didn't plan it, didn't want it, and spent weeks trying to convince myself it wasn't happening. But Melody was right. I do love you, Evangeline. Not because of our contract, not because it's convenient, but because you and your daughter have taught me that the best things in life can't be bought or negotiated or controlled." Evangeline's breath caught. "Atlas, I love the way you fight for Melody with the fierceness of a mother bear," he continued, his words coming faster now, as if he was afraid he'd lose his nerve. "I love how you've turned a business arrangement into a home. I love that you see past the money and the power to whatever's left of the man I used to be. And I love that despite everything I put you through, despite all my rules and boundaries and emotional walls, you've somehow managed to make me believe that I'm capable of being someone worth loving." Tears were streaming down Evangeline's face as she reached up to cup his cheek. "You beautiful, stubborn, impossible man. Of course you're capable of being loved. I've been falling in love with you for months, terrified that when our contract ended, I'd lose not just a husband, but the man who's become Melody's father." When Atlas kissed her this time, it wasn't the perfunctory brush of lips from their wedding day. It was desperate and hungry and full of months of suppressed longing. It was the kiss of a man who had spent years protecting his heart, finally allowing himself to feel everything. "Stay with me tonight," Atlas whispered against her lips, his forehead resting against hers. "Not because of the contract. Not because anyone's watching. Just stay." "Always," Evangeline whispered back. "For as long as you'll have us." But even as they held each other under the Seattle stars, neither of them knew that their newfound happiness was about to be threatened by family secrets that would shake the very foundation of everything they thought they knew about their marriage. The real game was just beginning. The next morning brought sunshine and the promise of a new beginning, but it also brought an unexpected visitor. Atlas was in the kitchen making pancakes, a skill he'd acquired specifically because Melody had mentioned loving them, when his doorman called. "Mr. Sinclair? Your cousin Darius is here. Should I send him up?" Atlas's blood turned to ice. Darius Sinclair had many qualities, but showing up for social visits wasn't one of them. "Send him up," Atlas said grimly. "Who's Darius?" Evangeline asked, sensing the sudden tension in the room. "My cousin. The one who stands to inherit everything if our marriage fails," Atlas replied, already moving to intercept Darius before he could encounter Melody. Darius Sinclair was everything Atlas wasn't. Charming where Atlas was serious, easygoing where Atlas was intense, and absolutely ruthless beneath his pleasant exterior. He was also devastatingly handsome in the way that made investors trust him with their money and women ignore the warning signs. "Cousin." Darius greeted Atlas with a warm smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Congratulations on the marriage. Sorry I missed the wedding, but business called." "What do you want, Darius? Can't a family member stop by to meet the new bride?" Darius's gaze shifted to Evangeline, and his smile became predatory. "You must be Evangeline." "I'm Darius, Atlas's devastatingly handsome younger cousin." "Charmed," Evangeline replied dryly, clearly unimpressed. "I hope you're settling in well," Darius continued. "It must be quite an adjustment, going from struggling architect to billionaire's wife. Though I suppose the money makes up for any inconveniences in the arrangement." Atlas stepped protectively closer to Evangeline. "Is there a point to this visit?" "Just checking in on family," Darius said innocently. "Making sure everything is as legitimate as it appears. Grandfather's will was very specific about the terms of inheritance. After all, the threat was subtle but unmistakable." Atlas felt his jaw clench. "Our marriage is perfectly legitimate." "Of course it is," Darius agreed. "Though I have to say, it's interesting how quickly you found true love after 34 years of sworn bachelorhood. Almost like it was convenient timing." Before Atlas could respond, a small voice piped up from the kitchen doorway. "Mama? Who's the man with the mean eyes?" Melody appeared in her pajamas, clutching Peanut the elephant, her violet eyes wide with curiosity and a child's instinctive wariness. Darius went very still, his gaze fixed on Melody with an intensity that made Atlas's blood turn cold. Well, Darius said softly. "What do we have here?" "The storm clouds are gathering, and Darius has just discovered the biggest secret of all. But here's what you don't know yet. Darius's interest in Melody isn't random. There are family connections and hidden truths that go back years, and when they all come to light, they're going to turn everything Atlas and Evangeline thought they knew about their marriage completely upside down. Hit that like button if you're on the edge of your seat, and tell me in the comments. What do you think Darius's real plan is? Because the next part is where all the secrets explode, where family betrayals are revealed, and where Atlas and Evangeline will have to choose between everything they've built and the love that's become more precious than any empire. The final confrontation is coming, and it's going to be explosive. The silence that followed Melody's innocent question stretched like a wire about to snap. Darius's eyes remained fixed on the little girl with an intensity that made every parental instinct Atlas had developed scream warnings. "Melody," Evangeline said quickly, moving toward her daughter, "why don't you go finish your breakfast? The pancakes are getting cold." But Darius stepped forward, his charming smile never wavering. "No need to rush her away. I'd love to meet Atlas's new stepdaughter." He knelt down to Melody's level, and Atlas noticed his hands were trembling slightly. "Hello, sweetheart. What's your name?" "Melody Wells," the little girl replied, still clutching her elephant. "Well, I guess it's Melody Sinclair now, since Mama married Atlas." "Melody," Darius repeated softly, and something in his voice made Evangeline go pale. "That's a beautiful name. How old are you, Melody?" 6 3/4, Melody announced proudly. "I'll be 7 in November." Darius's face went white. "November what?" "The 15th, Melody said, then tilted her head curiously. "Why do you look funny? And why do you have the same eyes as me?" The room erupted in chaos. "Get away from her," Evangeline snarled, rushing forward to pull Melody behind her. "Don't you dare touch my daughter." "Your daughter." Darius stood slowly, his mask finally slipping to reveal something cold and calculating beneath. "That's interesting, Evangeline, because I think we both know she's mine." Atlas felt the world tilt sideways. "What the hell are you talking about?" "Ask your wife about her business partner," Darius said, his voice deadly quiet. Ask her about the man who embezzled her funds and disappeared. Ask her about the father of her child. You're lying, Evangeline whispered, but her face had gone ashen. Am I? Tell me, Evangeline, when did you meet Derek Morrison? And did you ever wonder why he was so interested in a small-time architect with big dreams? Atlas looked between them, pieces of a horrific puzzle clicking into place. You sent him to her. You've been planning this for years. Derek was working for me. Yes, Darius confirmed. I needed someone close to the Grant family, close to the old man's bastard granddaughter. What? Atlas's voice cracked like a whip. Darius's smile was triumphant. Oh, you didn't know? Your wife isn't just some random architect you found, cousin. She's our grandfather's illegitimate granddaughter. Her mother was Margaret Wells, the old man's secretary and secret lover 30 years ago. The revelation hit Atlas like a physical blow. You're lying. I have the DNA test to prove it, Darius replied smoothly. Which means your precious marriage isn't just a business arrangement, it's technically incest. Cousins marrying cousins. Think how that will play in the press. Evangeline was shaking now, clutching Melody protectively. Even if that's true, it doesn't give you any right to my daughter, doesn't it? Darius pulled out his phone, showing them a document on the screen. Paternity test, conducted when Derek first told me about his pregnant girlfriend. That little girl is my biological daughter, which means she's the old man's great-granddaughter. And according to the will you never bothered to read completely, Atlas, legitimate heirs take precedence over adopted ones. Melody isn't adopted, Atlas said fiercely. She's mine. Not legally, not biologically, and not according to the will. Darius's smile was razor-sharp. Face it, cousin. You've lost. The company, the girl, everything. This is the moment where everything hangs in the balance. Atlas has to choose between his empire and his family, but what he doesn't know is that there's one more twist coming that will change everything. If this story has you completely gripped, hit that like button and tell me in the comments, what would you choose, everything you've built or the people you love? Because Atlas is about to discover that love is the only victory that matters. Before anyone could respond to Darius's ultimatum, a slow clap echoed from the penthouse entrance. All heads turned to see an elderly man in his 70s walking into the room, his silver hair perfectly styled, his blue eyes twinkling with mischief and intelligence. Atlas's face went white as a sheet. Grandfather. Hello, my boy, Grant Sinclair said cheerfully, as if rising from the dead was an everyday occurrence. I do hope you'll forgive the theatrical entrance, but I wanted to see how this little drama played out. You're supposed to be dead, Darius stammered, his confidence evaporating. Reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated, Grant replied with a chuckle. Though I must say, watching from the sidelines these past 6 months has been quite entertaining. Evangeline sank into a chair, still holding Melody close. I don't understand what's happening. What's happening, my dear granddaughter, Grant said gently, is that I've been orchestrating the most elaborate test of character in Sinclair family history. Granddaughter. Atlas's voice was barely a whisper. Oh yes, Evangeline is indeed my granddaughter, though not illegitimate as Darius would have you believe. Margaret Wells and I were secretly married in 1992, making Evangeline my legal heir. Grant's eyes twinkled. I've been watching over her and Melody for years, funding her daughter's medical care through various charities, ensuring they had what they needed while staying hidden. But why? Evangeline asked, her voice thick with emotion. Because I needed to know which of my grandsons, or granddaughter, was worthy of inheriting what I've built. Grant moved to the window, looking out at the city skyline. Darius, you failed spectacularly. The moment you had Derek abandon Evangeline and your own child, you proved you care more about power than family. And Atlas? Darius demanded, his face flushed with anger and humiliation. Atlas proved that when faced with the choice between his empire and the people he loves, he chooses love every time. Grant turned back to the room, his expression soft as he looked at his grandson. You've spent months caring for a child who isn't biologically yours, supporting a woman you thought was a stranger, and just now you were prepared to give up everything to protect them. That, my boy, is what leadership actually looks like. Atlas was staring at his grandfather in shock. The will, the marriage requirement, all carefully crafted to bring you and Evangeline together, Grant confirmed. Though I admit, I didn't expect you to fall in love quite so thoroughly. That was a delightful surprise. You manipulated us, Evangeline said, anger flashing in her violet eyes. You played with our lives like we were pieces on a chessboard. I guided you toward each other, Grant corrected gently. The love, the choice to become a family, the decision to fight for each other, that was all you. This is insane, Darius sputtered. You can't just change the will because you don't like how I handled one situation. One situation? Grant's voice turned cold. Darius, you've been embezzling from the family foundations for 3 years. You sent Derek to seduce and abandon my granddaughter. You've been gambling with company funds. And most damning of all, when you discovered you had a daughter with a rare heart condition, you chose to let her suffer rather than claim her and risk your inheritance. I have rights. You have nothing, Grant said flatly. The will you've been counting on? It was superseded by a new one 6 months ago. Everything goes to Atlas and Evangeline jointly, with Melody as the primary heir to the next generation. Darius's face contorted with rage. This isn't over. I'll contest it. I'll fight it in court. With what money? Grant asked mildly. Your assets have been frozen pending investigation into your various criminal activities. Derek Morrison was arrested this morning, and he's been very forthcoming about your involvement in his schemes. Atlas finally found his voice. Grandfather, why didn't you just tell us the truth from the beginning? Because, my dear boy, if I had simply introduced you to your cousin and told you to fall in love and get married, would you have done it? Atlas looked at Evangeline, remembering their first meeting, their careful negotiations, the slow burn of attraction that had grown into something far deeper. No, I would have run in the opposite direction. Exactly. You needed to choose each other, not have each other chosen for you. Grant moved to Melody, who had been watching the adult drama with wide, curious eyes. And this little angel needed to choose her daddy too. Melody looked up at Grant with the fearlessness of childhood. Are you my great-grandpa? I am indeed, sweetheart. Good, Melody said matter-of-factly. Atlas has been sad for a long time, and he needed us to take care of him. But Mama was scared he didn't really love us. And what do you think? Grant asked gently. Melody looked over at Atlas, who was staring at her with an expression of such love and protectiveness that it took Evangeline's breath away. I think he loves us so much it scared him. But he's not scared anymore. Darius made one last desperate play. Even if all of this is true, the marriage was still a business arrangement. It's fraud, and I can prove it. Go ahead, Atlas said quietly, moving to stand beside Evangeline's chair. Tell everyone that I entered a marriage contract for business reasons and fell in love with my wife. Tell them that I married a woman to save my company and ended up saving my soul instead. He knelt beside Evangeline's chair, taking her hands in his. Because here's what I've learned, grandfather, what you probably knew all along. The marriage might have started as business, but it became real the moment I watched Evangeline fight for her daughter. It became real when I realized I'd rather lose everything than lose them. Atlas looked up at his grandfather. So here's my choice, and I'm making it in front of witnesses. I choose Evangeline and Melody over the company, over the inheritance, over everything else. If loving them costs me Sinclair Enterprises, then I'll start over with nothing and count myself the richest man alive. Tears were streaming down Evangeline's face. Atlas, I choose you, he continued, his voice breaking with emotion. I choose the woman who turned a penthouse into a home, who taught me that strength isn't about building walls but about letting the right people inside them. I choose the little girl who called me daddy because she wanted to, not because she had to. He stood and faced his grandfather directly. I choose my family. Whatever the cost. Grant was beaming. And that, my boy, is exactly why you're going to make a brilliant CEO. The company needs someone who understands that business without heart is just greed, that true wealth isn't what you accumulate but what you're willing to give up for love. Atlas blinked in confusion. I'm not losing the company? On the contrary. You're gaining a co-CEO, Grant said, nodding toward Evangeline. My granddaughter is a brilliant architect with a keen business mind. Together, you'll build an empire that serves families, not just shareholders. And Melody will grow up knowing she's loved, protected, and valued for who she is, not what she can inherit. Grant's voice grew soft. She'll have the childhood I should have given you, Atlas. The one where love comes before profit. 2 years later, Atlas stood on the deck of the Sinclair family's new flagship resort in the San Juan Islands, watching Melody chase seagulls along the beach. The resort had been Evangeline's design, family-friendly, environmentally sustainable, and profitable in ways that created jobs rather than eliminating them. She's gotten so tall, Evangeline said, joining him at the railing. She was 6 months pregnant with their second child, glowing with health and happiness. "She's going to be a heartbreaker," Atlas replied, wrapping his arms around his wife from behind. "Just like her mother." "Flatterer." Evangeline leaned back against his chest. "Any regrets about the business marriage that turned into the real thing?" Atlas turned her in his arms, looking down at the woman who had taught him that love was the greatest investment he could ever make. "Only one." "What's that?" "I regret that I only get to fall in love with you once," he said, echoing words he'd spoken in a hospital waiting room that felt like a lifetime ago. "Though I suppose I'll have to settle for choosing you every day for the rest of our lives." "I think I can live with that arrangement," Evangeline said, standing on her toes to kiss him as Melody's laughter carried on the ocean breeze. Their kiss was interrupted by a small voice calling, "Daddy, Mama, come play with me." Atlas's heart still stopped every time Melody called him daddy. Not because of a contract or an obligation, but because of love freely given and joyfully received. As they walked hand in hand toward their daughter, Atlas reflected on the journey that had brought them here. A fake marriage had become the most real thing in his life. A business arrangement had taught him that some things couldn't be bought, negotiated, or controlled, that could only be earned through courage, sacrifice, and the willingness to risk everything for what truly mattered. Grant Sinclair watched from the resort's upper deck, his own heart full as he observed the family he'd helped create through careful manipulation and abundant love. Sometimes, he reflected, the best gifts came disguised as business propositions. And sometimes, the greatest love stories began with the words, "I have a business proposition that may be of mutual benefit." The millionaire CEO who had once measured his worth in profit margins and market dominance now understood that the richest man was simply the one who got to hold his family every night, who got to watch his wife build dreams into reality, who got to be called daddy by a little girl who had chosen him as surely as he had chosen her. Their marriage had been just business until the night he whispered, "Stay with me tonight." Now it was everything. And there you have it, a love story that proves sometimes the most calculated decisions lead to the most genuine emotions. Atlas and Evangeline's journey reminds us that love often comes disguised as something else entirely, that family is built through choice as much as blood, and that the greatest riches in life can't be found in bank accounts but in the arms of the people who choose to stay. Their story teaches us that vulnerability is not weakness but the greatest strength we possess. That sometimes we need to lose everything we think we want to find everything we actually need. And that the heart doesn't recognize contracts, it only recognizes truth, courage, and the willingness to risk everything for love. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that love conquers all obstacles when we're brave enough to choose it, please share it with someone who needs to hear that message. Subscribe to Lux Love Chronicles with Mr. Wentworth for more stories that prove the human heart is capable of extraordinary things when we dare to be vulnerable, when we choose love over security, and when we believe that happily ever after is possible, even when it starts with a business contract. Remember, the richest person in the world isn't the one with the most money. It's the one who has someone to love and someone who loves them back, unconditionally and forever. And sometimes, that love story begins with the most unlikely proposition of all. Until next time, this is Mr. Wentworth reminding you that your greatest love story is still waiting to be written, and it might just begin with the most unexpected business arrangement of your life.